This story begins with the fact that the girl fell in the snow somewhere far in the snowy mountains. Her body was covered with abrasions. She met the long-awaited death because there was no reason to live with her. She had neither a family nor friends, nobody at all. Now she was going to cut off her worthless life in this way. The girl covered her eyes and thought, to die from frostbite is not so bad. The incredible landscape of the snowy mountains was the last that her eyes saw. After some time, a man in a black fur coat appeared on the horizon. He looked at everything that was happening and said, "Incredible! And even on the deathbed, this woman lies as if all the snowy field belongs to her." He stood a little more looking at the entire unfolding picture, and then said, "You do not change yourself, the Empress." Then the man sat down on one knee and said, "If you decide to say goodbye to life so easily." But as soon as the man began to speak, the girl opened her eyes weakly and seemed to recognize him. Then he grabbed the girl in his arms and added, "I will gladly take you myself." The dark-haired man looked at her with a strange expression on his face and said, "Now you belong to me." And at that moment, the girl's consciousness turned off. Scraps of memories of 3 months ago surfaced in her head. Exactly 3 months ago, in the Thanatos Palace, someone gave an instruction to a fair-haired man. "Time has come. Kill the Empress." The girl in a red sleeping suit approached him from behind and continued, "Use Natasha, Your Majesty." And then her voice became a little quieter, and she added, "Get rid of the Empress and strengthen your position." The white-haired man clenched his teeth and looked forward with a crazy look. Now he was more like an evil dog. Ice and gold empires, Thanatos, everything on this earth was supposed to belong to the Emperor. But this is only formally. In fact, the Emperor could not do anything without the permission of the Empress. While the man was considering all this, the girl in red continued, "Leave the Empress's brother at me." In the head of this girl, there was already an exact plan about how to overthrow the Empress. The Empress's brother was to become a scoundrel. The next step in her plan, the Empress's brother in the future was to become a man who raped the Emperor's mistress. When the girl spoke, the expression of the Emperor's face became strange. Then the Empress will give up all her strength to save her brother. But the more she will try, the more it will look as if it is burned out. The Emperor's mistress clung to him and continued to certify the young man that everything would be fine. This plan was thought out to the smallest details. In the brother's room, evidence should have been found. Everyone will say that these are all the Empress's tricks because of the hatred of the Emperor and Natasha. The girl walked around the young man and wrapping her hands on his face with her hands. "However, before that, you must do something." After these words, she jerked him onto the bed, thus gaining a dominant position. While the Emperor was shocked by what was happening, she continued, "Empress's hands. They need to be tied. Deprive her of everything. Contacted, relatives, all who she values. It was necessary to get rid of everyone. But even after this, the whole plan has not yet come to an end. At the reception, she will face with His Majesty. Then the second phase was supposed to come. Then, before everyone at the reception, I will tell everyone that I wear under the heart of the child of His Majesty." This was to be the final act of this production, in which the Empress played such a terrible role. This will be her last way out. Thanks to the brother of the beast and jealousy, she will appear to be a terrible woman attempting to the family. The eyes of the Emperor's mistress shone with madness. "How wonderful, do not find." Close and family probably had to try to protect the poor Empress, and, following the plan, it was at that moment that it was necessary to expose the sword and sprinkle the earth with blood. Thus, according to the plan of Natasha, the Empress will not have a single chance to survive in such a situation. The girl smiled. This smile betrayed her even more distraught look. Then she decided to give orders. Then smear everything in the blood. No matter how smart the Empress is, the death of all loved ones will break her. When the plan was already at the final stage, the girl in white robes walked along a long corridor, accompanied by a maid. This was the very 17th Empress Thanatos, from the Empire of Ice and Gold. She walked all the time with a cane since she limped on her leg. The girl squeezed the cane stronger with every step. Rosalyn v. Sunset was popularly considered the most beautiful, a noble and perfect ruler in history. She was an outstanding politician, an excellent diplomat who speaks 6 languages. This girl helped the poor by creating a medical institution. The people also called her an empress with a big heart. No one ever spoke evil about her. Therefore, even because of such a shortage, it never occurred to anyone to poke a finger at her. Ice Rosalyn was loved by everyone. Only the view of this woman expressed greatness. But the chip was that everyone loved Rosalyn. All except the emperor, who part-time was her husband. Many years have passed since they became a couple. Although this was only a performance for everyone. How he dared to get rid of all my people. Even my brother was imprisoned in prison. Guilloty, a fool, blinded by envy. The girl walked along the corridor and thought, while I have someone to protect, I have to hold on. The maid that followed her expressed dumb sympathy for the girl and what she had to face. The girl mentally returned at the time when the empress's leg was badly damaged through the fault of the emperor. Then she came to her chambers and asked Rosalyn about well-being. And the empress answered with a smile. Nothing. I will live. This answer for a long time was printed in the maid's memory. Now she remembered this, squeezing her fingers. She followed this majestic individual now thought. Your honesty will destroy you. A simple melody echoed in the corridor. The notes were beaten off, from concrete walls. This further emphasized the desertedness of this place, and the loneliness that the empress ended. The maid sharply called out Rosalyn. She turned her head and looked at the girl questioningly. After that, the maid's face became strange, because she could no longer keep this expression of pity in herself. The empress decided to defuse the situation. Everything is fine. Can't you open the door? Suddenly, the maid sharply gathered her strength and announced loudly, I will be on your side, your majesty. Rosalyn looked at the maid and how much she believed in her strength, and then called her by name. Then the empress hid her head, and her lips broke into a barely visible smile. A series of diseases and coincidences deprived me of close friends. Lady Charlotte, a beautiful maid, or my faithful supporter as the Minister of Internal Affairs, a man who was always serious, and even the captain of the nightly detachment that was correctly defending me. A brave white-haired man. Their death was exactly the work of the emperor. It was pointless to doubt it. Anna, this very maid, was the last person left with Rosalyn. The girl did not want to lose her. The empress said, Anna, no matter what happens, immediately leave as far as possible from here. Just in case, I prepared you things. Anna came into a numb, and her voice fell into a cry. Your Majesty, don't say that! The maid squeezed the hem of her dress, trying to hide her emotions. Her voice trembled. And how am I? Then the girl bowed her head and said quietly, How can I leave you, Rosie? The empress smiled. Rosie! How long I have not heard this name. Wait only a few days. Count Sorrento collects strength. As for the city of Sunset. But Rosalyn did not let the girl finish. She smiled, as if saying goodbye, and said, Open the door? Anna came into even greater bewilderment. On her face, rather obvious signs of experience were displayed. The girl clenched her teeth and realized that she could not disobey the order of her mistress. Therefore, she slowly moved to the door. The door swung open and someone announced, Her Majesty Empress arrived. The measured knock of heels was heard in a huge ballroom. The Empress came. The girl slowly walked along the lifting hall, and from time to time caught her eyes. The knock of her heels as well as the sound of the cane of the carpet was accompanied by Rosalyn. The emperor was sitting on the elevated throne alone. Rosalyn approached him right. The man looked at her from top to bottom and thought. Nevertheless, she hung up on her feet. Disgusting woman! Approaching the emperor, the girl pierced him with a cold look that he had made his way to the bones. The man was a little scared of such a turn that it was noticeably affecting the expression of his face. After a little pause, he nevertheless turned to her. Why did you come to a banquet with a sore foot? Rosalyn looked at him and then said, Even if I limp, I continue to adamantly follow my path. The man stared at her with even greater contempt and anger. He thought, Witch! Somewhere in the distance stood a young man, on whose lips a suspicious smile broke out as soon as he saw the empress. It was the Krasis Minister of Foreign Affairs, Amora. Next to him, I surprised the empress's arrival. The table looked towards the girl and stated once, and the truth appeared. The empress continued to bend her line. Even stumbling, I go in the right direction. The man, who was sitting on the throne, was surprised that the girl could say this and clenched her teeth. At this time, Rosalyn's head was spinning only the idea that if he died, then won. She did not want to sacrifice anyone else. For the sake of protecting the father and mother and treasures transmitted from generation to generation. Suddenly, from somewhere from the depths of the hall, steps were heard. The hem of the red dress, arriving, dragged on the floor. The girl closed her face with a red fan. Her outfit looked defiant. She greeted the Empress. Rosalyn turned sharply, hearing a familiar voice. She thought, Natasha Rowanti. She knew for sure that this technique, only for the delegation of 7 countries, and no one except the government, could be present here. Therefore, the girl came in bewilderment, seeing Natasha here. Why did you come? Natasha covered her face with a fan and pretended to be very sorry. I'm to blame. I should not say that I wear the Emperor's child. Then your brother would not harm me. As soon as Natasha was told, a hype immediately rose in the hall. No looked glanced at and whispered. All at once came into general bewilderment. Have you heard? A child from the Emperor? Madame Natasha? No one was at all embarrassed by the inappropriateness of everything that was happening. Only the Empress understood what everything leads to. Natasha continued to break the comedy. She approached Rosalyn and said plaintively, It's my fault. Then the girl took the Empress by the hand and said, Therefore, please. On Natasha's lips, an ominous grin froze when she approached the Empress and began to whisper, Please. But the Empress reacted faster. At the moment, she did not care about the child. This shameless person was just born. After a couple of moments, Natasha fell to the floor as a result of the impact of the Empress. Rosalyn held a knife in her hands. Drops of scarlet blood flowed down from the knife, and Natasha had a bleeding wound on Natasha on his stomach. The girl continued to lie on the floor and bleed while the hype was rising. People in the hall were divided into 2 camps. One called the Empress, and the second to Natasha. Someone desperately shouted that Natasha needed the help of the doctor, and someone still did not realize what was happening. The foreign minister looked at this picture in bewilderment. Someone continued to scream, Spin the lady to a safe place. And the emperor at that time rejoiced sitting on the throne. A smile blossomed on his face, which did not fit into what was happening at all. Having hesitated a little, he gave his face a more worried look and shouted, The guard that you are waiting. The emperor ordered the guard immediately to take away a weapon from Rosalyn. The girl stood in the spot. Drops of blood still drained from the knife in her hands, and she could not move. It was the end. She looked at Natasha lying at her feet and realized that her blow was not fatal. The emperor wished Rosalyn a happy journey. After some time, someone finally went in the banquet hall. Natasha was taken to the doctor. The Minister of Foreign Affairs still looked at the scene of the attempt with bewilderment. The emperor was still sitting on the throne. This man looked crazy. He shouted, The banquet is cancelled, the minister thought. It destroys the future of Thanatos with his own hands, a miserable person who does not know what treasure he has. So the empress became a criminal in his country, which has served as loyalty and love all her life. When the foreign minister ended for a long time, he looked at the wall for a long time and could not understand what had just happened before his eyes. The person who accompanied the minister in the banquet spoke. Probably Empress E will survive this winter and die. A picture of a woman who was imprisoned was immediately loomed in her head. Before the overthrow of the Empress, His Majesty tormented her until she says the whereabouts of the family's treasure, and let her tormented hellish pain, Rosalyn, who knew the goal of the Emperor, held on. On the day after day, she was tortured by beating with a whip until a couple of hundred wounds remained on her back. This girl kept without making a single sound, even despite pain and fear. Meanwhile, outside the castle, people came to save her. The people began to rebel. Ordinary people for whom she did so much went out into the streets in order to ask not to kill Rosalyn. They all unanimously said that this was their only request. Only once show mercy. Sometimes the emperor went to the terrace. Then they turned directly to him, holding out his hands to him. The man clenched his teeth again. I thought they fell silent after a few days, but the end of the end was not visible. If she dies from my hand, this will certainly cause indignation in people, so— And while the emperor came up with a new plan, the empress continued to spend her days in imprisonment. This girl was no longer like that magnificent woman. Now she was all in scratches and abrasions. Once, one of her tormentors came to her again and in order to bring her to her feelings, poured a bucket of water into the girl. Drops of cold water flowed through her hair and fell into the eyes, but the girl's hands were tied to chains. Today, the emperor himself stood in front of her. Since she saw him for the last time, he has become even more terrible. The only expression on his face already caused her an attack of nausea. In the end, I could not learn anything from you. You are really the Empress of the Ice Kingdom. Even after so many torture, the location of the treasures did not say. I wanted to take you to pieces and kill you, but… The man's speech was interrupted by the exclamations of protesters. He stated, "As you can see, it is very noisy outside. And the truth, if people were rebelling." The man grinned again to feel his superiority. "I will have mercy on you, so be grateful." The girl did not even deign to raise her eyes on this vile type. A few minutes later, there was a ringing of chains, accompanied by the vile voice of the emperor. The empress weaned from the chains. "Hey you! Throw this woman into the ice mountains of Krolturia." The girl was no longer able to express any emotions. She is too tired of everything. But when the girl had already reconciled with everything, the emperor said in a chant, "I have a gift." After that, 2 guards threw 2 heads on the floor in front of the empress. It was a terrible sight in itself, but the girl came into numbness only because she knew these people. The people who belonged to these heads were those who raised it. Her father and mother. She screamed curses to the emperor, but as soon as she opened her mouth, 2 guards knocked on the ground. When the girl had not yet moved away from such a shock, they immediately began to beat her. She asked, "How could you?" But there was no answer. The emperor only mocked. "Do you know how to make such an expression on your face?" Bitter tears flowed from Rosalyn's eyes with streams. She bit her lips in a fit of anger. "I will never forgive you." At this time, the personality already familiar to us appeared on the horizon. The foreign minister arrived again. He stood on a hill and thought, "It's good that he returned." The empress was overthrown and nothing more. But this caused him anger, which he had never experienced before. The man looked at the palace with anger and thought, "What is the cause of anger? I don't know yet." But in one, he was sure for sure. Someday, he definitely had to destroy this luxurious imperial palace. The man who was walking after the minister also stopped and asked, "What are you looking at so closely?" Then this red-haired man looked around and saw a Thanatos castle in front of them. For years, the picture in his head finally fell into place. He approximately understood that he was bothering the minister. He put his palm in a white glove on the minister's fur cap, and then said, "I wonder how things are going there now." Rumor has it she was thrown into the ice mountains of Raburia, and while the red-haired man lamented about what kind of annoyance it was, the minister thought what to do. The minister stared at the imperial palace with even greater contempt in his eyes after hearing. He thought that this empress was much stronger than he could imagine. She was also much more beautiful in his eyes than everyone else he had ever met. And he also saved sadly than any other woman he had ever known. The reason for this sadness was not aware of him, but in fact, it seemed, lay on the surface. The dark-haired man abruptly pulled the reins of his horse about to quickly head somewhere. His partner was at a loss from such an impulsive act, but did not dare to ask questions. He just managed to shout to the minister in the trail, "Hey, Cayman, where are you?" But the cabin did not hear him. He carried on a horse faster than the wind and thought about something detached. The man clenched his teeth and now again looked like an evil dog that wins food. At the same time, somewhere in the middle of snow-covered void lay a girl in light white robes. Her body was made of indescribable cold, and the only thought in her head was, "Will I die like that?" She cursed the emperor on what the light stood, and also asked for forgiveness from everyone who died through her fault. The girl wanted to mourn their death, but there was no more tears. "I could not protect you. People who were nearby, all of them disappeared. I just wanted to do everything right. I wanted to become a good empress. Why did everything turn like this?" The girl was lying in the snow, unable to move even a finger. She whispered from her last strength, "Everything is fine." Suddenly, next to her was the cabin, who so abruptly went to her aid. He jumped off his horse and realized that he now has no extra time to think about the correctness of his act. His heavy boots left deep traces on the snow surface that she covered everything around. He said, "Incredibly, even on the deathbed, She will lie as if the whole snowy field belongs to her. Rosalyn's face was getting icy from the cold. It is so similar to you, the Empress. When the girl saw a familiar figure approaching her, she did not know what to think. At this time, the man gritted his teeth stronger and mentally asked himself, why was she born in Thanatos? The table looked at the girl that she was lying in the snow and was going to die so calmly without even clutching her life. Why was she supposed to be next to this dirty bastard? But now he did not have too much time to subject all doubts. The manner of the girl's cold body in a hug, and reproached himself for not finding this woman first. If you decide to say goodbye to life, I will be happy to take you with you. The man ran a finger over the lips of the Empress. They were covered with cracks and wounds from her own bites. Then the man thought that this opportunity could not introduce himself and kissed Rosalyn. Now you belong to me. Once, out of curiosity, the deity decided to create a man. Joy, sadness, anger, hope, and other emotions jumped into a pot with interest. Pretty the result of the deity wanted to show the creation to the main god. However, as soon as he was distracted for a moment, evil fell into the pot. Appearing in this way, a person from now on will always stand on the verge of good and evil. Giving in to emotions, people attacked each other and unleading wars for no reason. The first death was generated by people. The whole earth was saturated with blood. Upon learning of this, the main god was angry and tore the deity that created people into pieces. He made the deity personally deal with the rained chaos. Its parts were scattered around the world. 6 of them were placed in various objects. They were absorbed into heaven and time, into the sea and earth, and the remaining were placed in human bodies in the form of special gifts. They were divided into a gift of charm and gift of foresight, weather, death, and life. The dark-haired continued to kiss the Empress. This life could be breathed into another. He touched her frozen lips. Separating a piece from his piece, 2 raced that there was strength on a raven horse through a stormy blizzard. The guy pressed the barely breathing girl to him, adjusting the horse. Someone would say that I will hold this woman in my arms. I would not have believed in my life. However, the case has already been done. You have to survive. Necessarily. They were carried away into the distance. In a strict voice, red-haired, standing in front of a crowd of people, said, "Today we will break the camp here." The guys who stood nearby and heard the words of the girl proclaimed, "What a dubak! How does Thanatos survive?" The girl looked at them with a light grin and sentenced them to the arm. "Move there." After these words, she turned to the side, from where the crunch of snow was heard. "The table is you!" She did not have time to finish, as a man with a girl in her arms appeared before her. The red-haired began to point her finger at her and scream, "A minute that you dragged here!" Then she said in a rage, "Just don't tell me that this is a corpse." A girl with red hair looked at the snowy yurts in front. Alarming silence reigned around. She frowned and thought, "Is everything all right with his head?" The dark-haired man worriedly held a girl in his arms in tattered clothes. Then he carefully laid the girl on the bed. Her stained clothes contrasted with pallor. The cabin leaned over, silently looking at the Empress. His gaze was full of gloomy determination. The table recalled, "Empress in the center of the meeting. So, do you need an island in return for help with piracy?" Then she clarified, "Having given the island of Amaru, we will reduce the water of Thanatos by 3 kilometers." She continued, "In these waters there are zones for which we are fighting with a liger." And added, "Thought I don't know about it?" Then the man grinned and answered, "This is only 3 kilometers." Then he said, "The disputed zones are separated." The situation in the hall was tense. One of the participants suggested, "Give the island not entering the territory." A man with a slight smile added, "Goldal Island is suitable." But the Empress squinted, looking at the man. "That's what you are not." He asked with irony, "What are you talking about?" She told. "In the vicinity of this island, an amber ship sank." The woman said with a smile, "It seems that something secret is left on it." A dark-haired man said with a gloomy look, "But it's too late. Sandset family found this ship." The Empress continued, "I will return you everything that was there." Then added, "But in return." Then she smiled confidently, "You will provide a trading license for silkoprick cocoons. Happy?" The man stood by the bed, watching the girl. He thought, and so she received trade rights. He looked aside and thought, budget and meticulous. then added, "But brave and elegant." The Empress was breathing heavily on the bed and exhaled weakly. Black-haired with a tense expression on his face, looked at her. The girl repeated again. Then the darkness enveloped the consciousness of the man, and he thought, was that power not enough? Then he thought, on the diplomatic front, you were an enemy, which I wanted to destroy. The man sat, hugging the girl, clutching her to him, and said, "So why can't I see your torment?" Then they merged in a kiss, and the man still did not leave the thought. The girl opened her eyes and looked at the man. Her gaze was confused. The black-haired closed his eyes. His face became calm. The lady said, "Tamon Krasis," after which her eyes widened in surprise. She looked at him and thought, "What is this man doing?" The Empress pulled her hand with rage and sharply hit the table. The sound of a blow scattered around the room. The white-haired in stained clothes raised her hand to her face and asked, "What are you doing?" Then the dark-haired man stood with a serious look and answered, "I am flying you, so calm down." She raised her head. "Take me back to the mountains." He answered, "I would like you to survive." The woman in the blood staggered sharply and, looking at him, exclaimed. Her voice sounded shocked. After that, she was eating to pull out her hands from the grip of the table and shouted, "Do not come close. Just let me die." He looked at her with a cold and gloomy expression on his face. His eyes sparkled against the background of the shadow. The Manawan grabbed the Empress's hand, after which he said, "Even having survived this, do not care? To shame, insults, and even on the loss of a family? Unable to take revenge." The girl looked down. He raised his voice. "Do you want to be expelled from the place that you dedicated all my life? And it's a pity to finish in the ice mountains." The girl was silent. Her gaze was lowered. She only sighed quietly. Rosalyn's lips trembled, after which she said weakly, "Right." The table was silent. His face was hidden by the shadow. He did not say a word. Then the pink-haired grabbed the man's hand with whom he held her hand. "I have always been a headache for you." Then added, "Surely you dream of turning my neck?" A woman with a prayer squeezed his hand in her eyes. Her voice trembled. "Please, no more to humiliate me." The black-haired looked at her with a cold gaze, but did not answer. She stood in front of him and said desperately, "Kill me!" The man held the girl by the throat. She said, "Do not humiliate me even more. Just kill." And this woman, the overthrown empress of an enemy country, according to her, she was my headache. Then he thought, this thin neck, if I make a little effort, I can turn it easily. Eyes in which a thirst for life no longer warm. I can make them no longer open. The man suddenly froze, looking at her angrily, and thought, "But," Rosalyn recalled and thought, "So what you wanted." She remembered how he wanted to return what was on the ship, and the way she asked in return a trade license for the red cocoons of the Amur silkworm. But now she was pale and in stained clothes, clutching her hands on other people's gloves. The man removed his hands from her neck and said, "While you want to die so much, I will not allow it to happen." Rosalyn sat on the bed, and the man lowered his head. She looked exhausted and bewildered. Then the men of the man leaned toward the girl's leg and slowly kissed her, gently taking her in the palm of his hand. A woman covered with abrasions, frightened, leaned and asked, "What are you doing?" Then he bent to her leg and said calmly, "I said, I'm flying." Then added, "Do not move." The lady asked, "Stop," the cabin said. "I was your enemy, so from that moment I will do whatever I want." But the Empress said with a prayer, "I ask, enough." The black-haired man pulled away from his leg and grinned. Rosalyn tried to straighten her clothes and then awkwardly said, "This is a request, so I ask." The man answered, "Request? If you want me to stop." Anger performed on his face. "Then fight, the Empress." After these words, he pulled her closer to him, looking into his eyes. He asked, "Are you begging someone?" Then added, "Do not mix me." The table turned his head, clutching his teeth. He said, "If there is something that you want, so fight. Fight and achieve this. I, as then, are ready to be a loser as many times as I wanted." A grin appeared on the man's face. His gaze was determined. He said, "Do not tolerate, but fight." The girl with a tired expression looked at the man. The table asked, Wasn't that your lifestyle? It was a clear, frosty day. The snowy mountain massifs shone with snow. The cabin opened the curtain out into the street and left the tent, examining everything around. Holding the curtain with his hand and starting the frosty air, he looked back. The girl was still in bed, covered with a beige blanket. She slept sweetly. Snowfall covered the city, and the tops of the castle began to be covered with snow. By this time, the emperor stood in the middle of the room in his castle. A subject approached him from behind. Without turning to the interlocutor, he asked with a grin, "Did she definitely die?" Then the subject answered, "Yes, I'm sure." The emperor doubted. "How can you be sure if there is not even a body?" The subject continued, "I found traces of blood. It was exactly eaten by mountain animals." The emperor was silent. The fair-haired emperor calmed down a little. "Okay, and the relic?" The subject was nervous. We still haven't found her. It seems to be stolen for a long time." The emperor faded from the news and screamed, "This cannot be. Until recently she was with the empress. The relic should be somewhere nearby. Search all the places related to Her Majesty. Find and bring me a relic." The emperor looked angrily at the subject. He bowed his head and answered, "I obey. Praise to the sun, Tanatos." His Majesty looked after the departing man, clenching into fists. Then he brought his hand to his face and thought about something. Crap. The emperor covered his mouth with his hand. "I will tear me out now. By the power transmitted from generation to the heirs of the throne of Thanatos, was death. She passed to the heir when he became the emperor. Depending on the heir, her power was different. Therefore, the power of Galoti was not so great. This force could only be used in public. Quietly plant a plain plague and leave painfully dying. Each time the use of force brings returns. And Geloti, who recently committed the mass murder of close empress. Now I just suffered from this return." The emperor bent to the ground and covered his mouth with his hand. Moreover, even having such a force, he could not kill Rosalyn. All because of the wedding ceremony. During the oath, Emperor Thanatos drips his blood into holy water and sings the empress with it. This was one of the rites showing that spouses should not go against each other no matter what. He wanted to kill her in another way, but the familiar jewel of her family defended her. The emperor, sitting on the floor and covering his mouth with his hand, coughed and laughed at the same time. He finally succeeded. The emperor burst into an evil and hysterical laugh. Then he screamed all over the room, and his scream was echoed. "So you need. Was you outstanding? Look now, she died." The fair-haired man visible noticeably. He began to gloat even more. "You should have known your place." Suddenly, the man turned to the side, noticing the approach of a certain object to him. A smile from his face instantly disappeared, and his eyes widened at the moment. A large picture fell a meter from the emperor. He cried out and then crawled back. After what happened, all the maids and the servants came to a loud sound. "What happened, Your Majesty?" They began to survive him from different sides, asking, "Are you okay? What is happening here?" He answered with a dissatisfied face, "Nothing special. Raise me to rise. And yet, throw this damn picture." The maids raised her and held her in their hands. Raising his gaze, he became angry even more and frowned, looking forward. His gaze fell on the picture of Empress Rosalyn, a picture of Empress, past the servants. He peered into this picture. The emperor wrinkled and felt disgust. After that, at the moment, he put his hand on the hilt of the sword and sharply took it out. He mercilessly cut the picture of Rosalyn into pieces, violently shouting, "Direct, die, this witch." The emperor shouted, "Please die." All the servants present, having heard this, looked at him in fear. After some time, he bowed his head in front of this picture, lowering his sword to the floor. The man looked tiredly at the fully cut portrait of Empress Rosalyn. His sword fell loudly on the floor from his hands, leaving behind a tense silence in the room. The emperor knelt over him and wrapped his arms around his head, sighing, surrounded by servants. The town began to fall asleep even more with snow, and it was cold on the street. Many people went on a sandy desert. The road did not promise to be easy. The people who moved ahead rode horses with full confidence in their actions. The scorching sun was breaking through the scattered clouds. There was impossible heat. The former empress pressed up to the table and thought, "It would be better to leave me to freeze in the snow." This stuffiness contrasted so much with the usual weather of those places where it came from. The girl thought, "How long have I already with him?" She remembered the day when she opened her eyes and saw the silhouette of a man hanging over herself. After that, she immediately went through to think in this channel, and she switched to her hands. Rosalyn stared at her fingers, which not so long ago bleed and were covered with scratches. But now her palms and fingers looked almost like new ones. Even without healing ointments, they almost healed. Then the girl squinted her gaze to the side to look at the face of her savior, and then she came to her mind. Maybe it's all about him, but this guess was thrown back at the next moment. The girl did not believe her own thoughts. No, stupidity. Over the past 100 years, the fifth fragment has not appeared. So, this man cannot be them. But why then did I recover so quickly? As if feeling her anxiety, the man asked, "How do you feel?" Rosalyn dumbfounded. Her eyes opened for sure, not expecting any concern from the side of the table. Then the girl hid traces of confusion from her face and said, "Let you save me, but I can die at any moment." Hearing such a statement from the girl's lips, disappointment was reflected on the face of Tamon. He sat on black kolya, holding a girl in white clothes in his arms, and smiled softly. "Spit." In the man's voice, the warmth was heard, which was not like him. "I will save you as many times as required." Hearing such a statement by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Rosalyn frowned. The next moment, she again shaved her gaze at him, wanting to make sure that he had no hidden intentions. But as soon as she did it, as a man loudly announced to everyone, "Arrived." Then his voice became quieter, so that only the Empress heard him. "This is my country." The capital of the country of Amor was not very large. It consisted of a castle and a small residential quarter. This city was called Guinness. The delegation was immediately met by commoners with screams and words of support, praising the great Tamon. All from small to great greeted the dark-haired man with words. "Long live there." The expression on the man's face still softened when he looked at the girl on his hands. She pressed her face, hiding her, but the next moment she coughed. This may have been a symptom of some kind of illness. The table immediately turned to Lonaso to notify the fact that he would have to leave the delegation earlier. After Lonaso looked at him, he said, "Urgent affairs appeared. I will go first, so provide reports, please." The red-haired guy confused. This was not the first time that the table leaves him like this for this woman. The man rode on a horse at such a speed, as if the Empress on his hands was on the verge of life and death. As soon as he got to his possessions, as a man ran out to the meeting, "Have you decided to come here right away?" Apparently, that person was the head of the servant. Since then, he ordered others to take care of the owner. The man looked worried. He looked at the general and asked, "Who are you holding in your arms?" But the table chose not to answer the questions of this old man, but simply shaved his gaze at him and asked, "Have you already prepared water?" It seemed that the whole servant was afraid of its master. Fear was reflected on the butler's face. "Yes, everything is ready." After a couple of moments, Tamon brought the Empress to the bathroom, which was at the end of the long corridor. The head of the servant opened the door for him and said, "Come on." The manor held in his arms an Empress. Already standing on the threshold, the minister turned and ordered, "From this minute, no one to go." After that, with a loud knock, he slammed the heavy door of the bathhouse behind him and disappeared behind her. The bathhouse looked quite spacious and elegant. An elaborate chandelier hung on the ceiling, and the water was crystal clean. The elements of the clothing of the table flew by the floor a few seconds after its entrance to the bathhouse. He also took care of Rosalyn, laying a towel on the floor and putting it on him. Then the man gently touched her hand. With such lighting, it was clearly visible how pale the girl had the skin. The cabin sincerely smiled and thought, "The wounds have already managed to drag on." A towel was tied on his belt. He grabbed the girl in his arms and carried her to the water. The man stepped one foot in a hot bath. The water was so warm that steam was coming from it. At that moment, when the girl's body touched hot water, she cried out. The table said, "Woke up?" The next second, the girl was indignant and asked loudly, "Where are we?" The man answered quite quickly to this question. "In my house." "More precisely, in the bathroom," Rosalyn asked. "In a personal bathroom?" "Of course. I heard that in Amra they love to take a bath because of the heat, but so that even people could not afford such a room. But the girl broke out of her thoughts the next second. Her gaze fell on something strange. She looked at the hanger where the clothes were hung. There, in the middle of things, a dagger for self-defense also hung. He was suspended on a rope to a wooden hook. The shine of the blade looked threatening. The cabin did not fully understand her bewilderment, and also directed his gaze there. "What are you looking at?" The next moment, the girl rose from the water, looking at the man and calling his name. She continued, "You made the wrong choice, deciding to save me." Then the man smiled easily, as if understanding what she wanted to lead this dialogue to. He also got up from the water and leaned over the girl as he was clearly higher. "I myself decided what was right and what not." The former empress herself, not noticing thee, began to step back, although in her movements there was some elusive concentration. After that, the girl seemed to smile easily and said quietly, "Insolent." The smile of Tamona became even wider. His eyes, on the contrary, narrowed beyond recognition. Infallibility is inherent in everyone. At the moment when the girl went far enough, the distance that she considered safe, she asked, "And what is your goal?" The table focused all his attention on how confidently she pronounced her words. His gaze picked her face, and after that, he lowered his eyes below. But a little later, in embarrassed eyes, he looked away. In the head of the girl, notes of ridicule were heard. "I really did not think that the table is able to confuse the appearance of a woman." Then the man scratched his head and said, "I, too, did not think that I could so passionate about the empress of another country." In response to this, Rosalyn raised an eyebrow and said, "If you need a woman, then look for another. Surely there are a lot of wanting." The table continued to smile and retorted, "Still, however, all of them are not you." The next moment, the girl Snopia tried to move away. "You say so, as if you need only me." The man was approaching. "That's right, you are the one I want." At some point, Rosalyn was on the border of the bath, standing on land. "Nonsense, I have nothing." Meanwhile, the cabin began to realize even more to what everything leads to. "You are mistaken, you have a lot." The next moment, he began to list all the good qualities that he saw in Rosalyn. "Your experience, mind, body, and your heart." He came closer to her as the Empress moved away. "I want all this." A smile on her face became even more pronounced after Rosalyn realized that she had almost fulfilled her plan. "In that case," the girl said, "I really feel sorry." And the cabin finally realized what she was about to do, and because of this, he became scared. In the next instant, she grabbed the same dagger for self-defense from a hanger. Her movements were sharp and clumsy. Rosalyn looked crazy. She brought the dagger to her throat and said, "I have nothing to give you." The cabin came into even greater bewilderment and confusion. His pupils narrowed so much that his eyes seemed almost white. Drops of scarlet blood sprinkled onto the clean floor of the bath. What the minister was not ready for was so fast, but the table already knew what to do at the next moment. His confusion was caused by the fact that he did not think that the girl would decide on this. Once again, he looked at the bloodied dagger and realized that he needed to act very quickly. He started his hand under the neck of Rosalyn and said, "This damn woman." He tried his best to save, and she again for her. He looked at the bleeding fresh cut on the girl's neck, who so much wanted to die. At the same time, Rosalyn thought, strange, truly strange. Someone was eager to brutally kill me. The next moment, the table pushed his lips to the bleeding wound on the girl's neck. And to save someone. After a few seconds, she began to gradually recover. She certainly did not expect this. It was not possible to die. Then the Menkini raised it in his arms and said, "Thank God the wound is not deep." The girl thought, "Crazy." The man clenched his teeth. Drops of blood were still visible on his lips after a recent resurrection. How dared to die? Rosalyn began to gradually open his eyes. She heard, "You left yourself to the mercy of fate." Then the man finished the phrase. "And I picked up." The Empress immediately rebelled in the head of the Empress about how she was cold in the mountains. The minister's voice was heard warmly, although his face spoke of the opposite. "And saved you, giving your vitality." Having agreed, he hugged her stronger than ever. "Therefore, so desperately, I hold you in my hands." The Empress still put up with the consequences of her uprising from an almost afterlife life and mumbled something, and the cabin clenched his teeth and hissed through them. So, no. He squeezed his arms even more and said, "Now you are mine." Meanwhile, on the main street of the city, everyone met delegates. It was lively. Someone called Lonaso from the crowd. Lonaso immediately recognized this voice. It was none other than the Queen of Amur Terence Rantif. The girl asked, "Why don't you go to the royal palace? But are you standing here?" And he only thought, "Tamon, asshole." And while Lonaso put up with her fate, the queen frowned and asked, "Do you ignore my words?" The girl was at a loss about the silence of the delegate, and the delegate himself did not know what to do. Then he still decided to get off his horse and somehow explain the emerging embarrassment. "In no case, Your Majesty. Thanks to the care of Her Majesty, we returned safely," the girl said. "I knew that you were on the way," but she could not have imagined that the delegates would return today. And then she wondered, "Where is the cabin?" He said the first thing that came to mind. Probably got angry because of the Emperor Thanatos, because he was struck by the disease. Lonaso continued, "The table could not say about this to subordinates. Therefore, having warned me, he immediately went into his possessions. And in truth, if you see the Emperor of Thanatos, the disease that was not there will appear, because they are nausea nasty genus." It seemed that the queen believed in this bike so composed on the go. "By the way, I am worried. This is the first time that the disease made itself felt." And then she said what the poor Lonaso shocked and mentally buried himself. "I have to go to him now." Lonaso began to dissuade her. "Or maybe then, is it possible to greet me first?" The poor fellow tried to do everything only to distract her. "You partially heard about what the Emperor Thanatos did this time." Then Lonaso came up with something and said, "Would you like to hear about it in more detail?" The expression of the queen's face changed dramatically, and she smiled, intrigued, and then she announced loudly, "Then let's first hold a banquet in honor of the return. Greetings, gentlemen." And while Lonaso rejoiced because his lie was a success, the queen, looking at him, whispered something to the maid. The man couldn't think in any way that his words about the disease of Tamon's disease would have doubtfully doubt. He, on a white horse, led the rest of the delegation on black horses forward. We enter the palace, and while the whole delegation was heading to the royal castle in order to draw up a report, the queen came up with something. She sent one of her personal maids so that she would approach one of the delegation messengers. The girl said, "From this moment, please follow me." The man did not expect this at all, but still, he followed this girl in turquoise robes. He did not have the right to resist the will of the queen. Meanwhile, in the bathhouse of the man's estate, steam still rose from the water. Two people were sitting on a parapet of baths. The habit was eagerly kissed by the Empress. He did it as if he had his last opportunity to kiss her now. The door to the bathhouse all this time remained closed. No one dared to go in, as the owner ordered them. The Empress squinted her eyes and thought, "Does he really treat me in this way?" The girl did not resist the actions of the table for some time. His monologue about the value of life so sunk into her soul. But then it seemed to her that everything that was happening was a little crossing that thin line between simple treatment and something big. She hastened to push the man away from herself, not wanting with him any close connection, except his voluntary compulsory treatment. Rosalyn clenched her teeth and expressed her dissatisfaction with some kind of mechanical short sound. After that, the girl pulled away even more, but noticed, "I really feel completely healthy." The table continued to smile maliciously. "What to do now? You regret that you could not die?" The man noticed how the girl was looking at him and said, "Do not look so viciously. This is your view and expression." And then he said something that made the Empress mentally return to the past. "I will make them hot." She focused more and more on his words about her gaze, and involuntarily recalled the moment from the past. On that day, her ex-husband, the Emperor, told someone from the nobility, "The place where I sleep. I don't know if it is a bedroom or a stable on the street." Instead of hugging the Empress, "Will it not be warmer in a hug with an ice doll?" Someone threw unflattering comments towards the Empress. "Any man will cool down in front of this woman." The girl squeezed her lips even more, as if not wanting to return to her past anymore. She quietly asked, "Leave me alone, the local." And the man answered, "And if I do not want to?" Then the girl asked, "I look like a person who will obey orders?" She said fairly honestly, "Yes, I threw myself to die, and you picked up on how you think it would come out of this." After these words, the girl's face became very serious, and the eyebrows frowned. "Will I live or die? I will decide it myself." Hearing this from the mouth of the Empress, the man involuntarily exhaled. At heart, he understood that the girl should also want to live. In his eyes, notes of disappointment again reflected. He knew that he himself could not change anything, right? But at the same time, he was glad that her former determination returned to the Empress. "This is exactly you." He also knew that the girl had changed. Not so, which longed for its death, forgetting about everything. He clearly remembered that emptiness in the eyes of this poor woman at the moment when his hands closed on her neck. But now the cabin looked at the girl sitting in front of him and thought, "You are 100 times more beautiful." The next moment, he held out his hand to Rosalyn's face and exhaled. "Such are you." He touched the girl's pointed chin and said, "You make me impatient." She was clearly not happy with such a gesture on his part and hit him on the arm. "Enough!" At this moment, the man came into misunderstanding from how Rosalyn could change his thoughts so quickly. She just wanted to kill herself, and now she already looked like a person who could stand up for himself. "Don't touch anymore." But as soon as she ended the phrase, "To my lips, how it hit," the man immediately violated her request and kissed her. Having pulled away from his lips, a smile slept, as if he had just been forbidden to him something too important for him. And while the girl was still confused, he said, "Fine, I promise." The man closed his eyes and said with a respectful tone, "If you don't like it, I will not do it anymore." But still, there was some hidden meaning in this. It was written in his gaze. "I will not touch your lips as it hit, I swear." The girl with tears in her eyes said, "Didn't I hate you?" She continued, "Why do you continue to torment me?" The table only looked at her with a smile. Then he answered her, "I have never experienced hatred for you. Irritation, yes, but not hatred." Rosalyn looked at him with a perplexing look. The man began to speak. "Anyway, it was I who saved you sharing part of my life." The Empress began to object. "I did not ask you about it." The table looked at her with a smile. "If there are no reasons, then it remains to find them again, right?" The man found the girl by surprise. He began to list. Revenge, the collapse of Thanatos, hatred, after which Empress Rosalyn answered, "Such things do not interest me." The black-haired pulled her by the light strand of hair closer to him and asked, "Then what about love?" Her eyes expanded at one point, and she looked perplexed at the interlocutor. Then the man added, "You have a nice reddened face now." It seems that my words were shocked. Night. Only some of the windows of houses are burning, and the light wind sways the remaining foliage. As soon as the Empress touched her head to the pillow, her eyes immediately closed. She got comfortable and thought, "How much I'm tired today." The city plunged into a nightmare. Herds of monsters ran through the streets that were like bulls. People panicked. On the flock moving forward, they instructed their spears, shouting something unintelligible. These red monsters fell out of a black crack in the sky. One of the people in armor shouted. One ran into a shelter. Faster, the Emperor with the Empress in danger. In the room, which was cracks and garbage, people sat with the Empress and Emperor. A girl with red hair was sitting on the floor and screaming, "Rosalyn! I'm scared." She, in turn, promised and reassured in a calm tone, "Everything is fine. I will protect you," the Empress thought. It is amazing, just during the visit of the imperial family, a crack arose to the shelter. Then, a large red monster crawled out of a huge hole in the wall, which went directly to people. The fair-haired thought, "By the time the guard will come up, at least one of us will remain alive." Rosalyn sat next to the children, and the Emperor, taking his sword, directed him towards the monster. His breath caught, but he reassured people, trying to hide them. "Do not worry, Empress," the man said with an evil smile. "I can own a sword. It costs nothing to deal with one. On, get it." The first blow with a sword fell on the face of a monstrous beast. It immediately revealed a huge green mouth and published a loud, deafening roar. The beast got angry even more and headed towards Empress Rosalyn and a little girl. The Empress's face turned pale, and her eyes widened with fear. She said, Dangerous. The next moment, she deftly dodged the stroke of the horns of a large beast, covering the girl. The Empress wanted to scream with fear, but hesitated. She closed her mouth with her hand and thought, "No, you can't scream. The beast is susceptible to the sound, so you need to be silent." The Emperor, directing the blade of the sword onto the monster, screamed, "You! I have not finished yet. I'll show you what it means." He did not have time to finish. The sword fell out of his hands, and the man felt a blow to his stomach. Then he was thrown back a couple of meters back into the wall. The fair-haired screamed. A huge stone fell right on his face suddenly from the ceiling, and the Emperor cried out. He knelt down, pressing his nose into his nose from pain. My nose, while the beast looked at him. Holding on to the injured nose, the Emperor was nervous. And where is the security? Immediately. A monstrous beast with red eyes and huge growths looked him directly in the eye. The Emperor, having waited a few seconds, threw the sword to the side and quickly rushed away from the monster. Children, sitting in a heap and watching the Emperor run away, were at a loss. The fair-haired Emperor hid behind the wooden plane, which was behind the children. He looked cowardly from there with one eye, examining the monster and evaluating the situation. The children hugged stronger and looked at His Majesty. Does the Emperor use us as a shield? The eldest of them thought, if so, then we are in danger. What to do? The boy began to go towards Empress Rosalyn. Surely Her Majesty knows what to do. The fair-haired woman lowered her gaze to the floor, not daring to look at the boy. She was silent. The lady looked at the sword lying on the floor. Child, can you help me? The boy answered, yes. Amazing! If the beast fits and crashes into the door, we can get out. Rosalyn put her hand to the boy's cheek and looked with tenderness. Can you scream hard? They all turned around and looked at the red monster, which moved back a little. After that, the boy, having gained courage, got up and that he shouted loudly. The Empress wrinkled a little from a loud sound and thought, you need to hurry. She took the sword in her hands and continued to think. There was a good opportunity. The boy continued to scream deafeningly. This opportunity cannot be missed. While the boy distracted the beast, the fair-haired Empress held his sword in her hand and slowly approached the monster. Suddenly, she took the hilt in both hands, waved onto the red beast. The Emperor, who was at the raised table at 3 children, looked scared. The man watched everything that was happening in bewilderment. 3 children clenched more tightly into a heap, hugged and trembled with fear. Pulling the sword blade several times in the monster, it fell dead to the floor. Empress Rosalyn exhaled with some relief, and drops of sweat flowed down her cheeks. Then she turned around, and her hair was stained in the blood of a terrible beast. The pink-haired girl, standing with a sword in her hand, turned back and looked at the Emperor. A fair-haired man looked at Rosalyn, then at the children, and did not know how to justify himself. The children looked at him angrily, pressing themselves against each other. He began, I am the Emperor of this country, and my security is above all. Why are you staring at me like that? Rosalyn squeezed the hilt of the sword even more, listening to the excuses of His Majesty. The man shouted deafeningly, holding his head with his hands. In the city lay the bodies of amazed red monsters, and the guard in blue cloaks continued to save people. A few days later, the palace of Thanatos, as before, stood snowy. The Emperor with Natasha, who leaned against him, stood in the room. She said, Will you give, Your Majesty? The Emperor was distracted from the words of his mistress and looked forward at the figure walking in their direction. Empress Rosalyn, with her subject, passed by, a stone face past them, with a stone face, while restraining. Her expression was calm. She tried not to react to this meeting. Mistress Natasha, standing next to the man, looked contemptuously at the Empress. After a couple of seconds, she noticed that Rosalyn was leaning on a cane. Passing by the girl, Natasha told the Emperor, You were right, Your Majesty, she is lame. He grinned and said, Yes, but for a cripple, it behaves very arrogantly. The Empress continued to go forward along the red carpet, with a companion, trying to ignore their words. Rosalyn suddenly wakes up in bed, realizing that all this was a dream. Then she stood up a little, rubbing her forehead with her hand, and thought. 3 years have passed after that day. She was sad and continued to think. I wonder if everything is in order with that child. She recalled how a brave boy shouted rampant in front of the beast for the sake of their salvation. The Empress continued to think. In front of the banquet, I left him a gift. He will definitely protect him, but... The fair-haired lady resolutely rose from the bed and got up, looking around the empty and dark room. In short steps, she headed towards a bulky balcony in one sleeping robe. Rosalyn approached him and thought, "Now I can die." With one deft movement, she opened the door to the balcony. A cool night wind blew her face. Then her eyes stared forward, looking around the unprecedented expanses. Before her from the balcony, a magnificent view of the endless and blue sea opened. She leaned on the fence, thinking, "Is this the sea that I just heard about?" The Empress watched the sea surface with pleasure, continuing to think. So this exists. The girl bowed her head and closed her eyes a little. A good look before death. Rosalyn slowly was about to fly a hedge in order to end life. At the last moment, she sat on the partition, hanging her legs to the sea. "Thank you for showing me the sea, Tamon." Her feet glided carefully down, and she was ready to feel the cold of seawater. At that moment, the black-haired man saved her again. He acquired the girl, thereby not allowing her to fall. It seems that henceforth I should be alert even during sleep. The girl leaned against his face. "Drummer?" With one movement, he pulled Rosalyn to him and took her in his arms. "I thought I should change my promise. I will treat you when you get sick or get hurt. I will do everything possible for you to live. But there are some problems with the method of treatment. Do you understand what I am talking about?" He looked at the girl's face. "Even knowing this, you continue to do such stupid things." The man continued, "I should think that you yourself want it." Rosalyn was indignant. "What?" "If so, you can say in words. Even if you do not try to die, I will listen to you at any time." In response, the Empress asked him to stop carrying nonsense, to which the table only smiled at. He brought the girl into the room. "Since you woke up, how about a walk?" she said. "I won't go. Let go." She nervously closed her eyes, thinking about the words of a black-haired man. After a while, they rushed riding a horse. "Where are we going, the local?" he answered. "I don't know, in a good place." He looked at Rosalyn with a grin, saying, "Hold on stronger." He continued to smile, thinking, "Seeing her healthy, I think that my abilities are not so useless." 5 years ago. The table lay on the bed. The body temperature rose a lot. The disease that was passed down from generation to generation in our family began to torment me. If I did not accidentally stumble upon a dilapidated manuscript in the corner of the family library, he would have died without knowing the truth. The lost fifth piece of power was called life. The reasons why it did not appear from the appearance of others. There was no person who could withstand the power of this force. If the accumulated heat for a certain period of time cannot be discarded, then the heart will stop. The way to release this heat was to throw out or give it to someone. A simple solution was just to be with girls. But oddly enough, I did not want to do that. He was sick of the smell of powder, and he covered his nose while next to the girls. The girls asked what was happening to him, while he hastily left them. The table tried to restrain himself and just went away from the fair sex.